How we doing out there? Uh, Joshua Woods here, back with another video. Um, this one I've titled "Charge the Cops for Complicity." Charge the cops for complicity. This is referring to the other officers that was involved in the George Floyd murder. The one that was standing there watching and going back and forth with the bystanders on the sidewalk, videotaping and such, and the other two officers that had their knee on George Floyd's back as well. So they're supposed to be making an announcement later today, I think, on whether, with their investigation, the police department of Minneapolis, on whether they're going to charge the other officers, even though they've been relieved of their duty, terminated. So this is like my third video in a row in 3 days, and I think it's mostly because I really want there to be justice served for the murder of George Floyd. This black man wasn't doing nothing that absolutely warranted murder. For it to be live on video, for a cop to know he's being videotaped and he still doesn't get off this man's neck. I mean, part of the frustration, and this is what everybody got to understand. Part of the frustration in a lot of genuine protesters, not the ones that are rioting and looting and setting buildings ablaze and trying to face off with the police. The genuine part of the frustration, in my opinion, is the idea of, because of the increased advancement of technology, we now have expedited the idea of terminating cops. We have now become more readily, using speed to terminate cops and to hold them accountable because of video, because the idea that somebody can video the whole thing, just like those two college students in Atlanta. They reviewed it, the police commissioner, police chief, the video, and I think within about 3 days, they were able to determine that that was misconduct, what was done, tasering those two college students, even though they were out past the curfew, and because how they mishandled them, yanking on the driver's arm, and this man still having, volts in him that needed to be removed. One of them was in there for 8 hours still. The treatment of that being videotaped, and the police department deciding, yes, those two cops need to be relieved of their duty. But this has been happening for years. And it's only because the increase in advancement of technology. This is just one segment of genuine frustration from the lawful protesters. This has been happening for years, and the only reason why it's getting attention, it's getting traction, is because it's being videotaped. The reason why there was such an outcry in the 1992 LA riots of Rodney King was because it was videotaped. But this has been happening in Alabama since the 40s, 50s, Mississippi, Medgar Evers that was killed, in his driveway, James Meredith that was shot, trying to lead a protest, luckily survived, but there was just so many others that were killed, and there were no protests, and it's only because it's their word against yours. It's their word against yours. But now that you have clear video with these iPhones and the accuracy being so good, they can now say this is undeniable. The police chief, the county commissioner, the DA's office, is only because the video makes a statement of its own, which is the police brutality is undeniable. Black people have complained at departments like City Hall. They have one down here in Wichita called Professional Standards. You can go down there and make a complaint anytime you want on a law enforcement officer of any sort. If you feel like you've been wrongfully, pulled over, if you feel like you've been wrongfully ticketed, given a citation, they did me in many different ways that will make people say they were out to get you. They were out to get you. My very first DUI that I had in 2007, I remember showing up to municipal court, and this lady, this transcriber lady, she was the one that gave me my court dates. I remember the judge said, okay, after everything was done, go over to her, she's gonna give you your dates. I said, okay. And I remember this woman, I remember her vividly saying this was, I believe, January of 2007. I got stopped January 5th on my birthday. I wasn't even stopped. I was already pulled over, I had 2 flat tires, but the cop came up on me, and I did a previous video talking about that too. But after municipal court was over, after I spent the night in jail, January 5th, early mornings of January 6th, as a matter of fact, the judge says, go over there and have her give you your dates. And I remember she gave me 3 different dates for the month of, I believe, February or March. It was like 2 in February and 1 in March. So I'm like, okay, so I'm new to the court system, first time ever being arrested, I don't know. And then I get police that show up to my door like early February, like February 4th, 5th, something like that, about a month later after showing up to court almost, and they come into my door with a picture of my mugshot from the last time I was in jail, and they saying they got an FTA on me. I didn't even know what an FTA was. And they said it was a failure to appear. And I was like, my court date is not until another 2-3 weeks. I wrote it down. And they was like, we're sorry, we got to take you in. Started handcuffing me and everything. And then everybody I spoke to later on, they said when it comes to municipal court, it's always bi-monthly. They never give you 2 different dates in 1 month. They never give you 2 different dates in 1 month when it comes to municipal court. They give you a date for 1 month, and then they won't have you show up again for another month. That's how municipal court works in the city of Wichita. I'm new to this. I don't know. All I know is that they're trying to screw me, and what it turns out, I had 7 unpaid tickets that this municipal judge found out about, and he was trying to compile all of those into one big fine that he was going to then attach to another fine, which comes to is brought on from the first offense DUI. Every first offense DUI has its own fine, which is like $1,000. And when that judge learned that I had 7 unpaid tickets, he just attached all of that together. But only how he was going to do that is if he brought me in on another charge. And they tried to use the FTA as another charge. Cops are crooked. Judges are crooked. The court systems are crooked. They do this to black people. Whether y'all want to believe it or not, they do it to black people. I mean, you got people who are really frustrated because of the system, the things they do, and it's like, okay, what's going to be done? What's going to be done? There's a genuine concern among lawful protesters who really just get tired of the treatment of a crooked judicial system, a crooked police department, and they're wanting changes. And to me, I think there's also a legitimate, concern among protesters where it had to take technology growing and getting better for us to be believed. That's sad. That makes me emotional. Only how we're believed is because of videotape. It's undeniable at that point. You can see George Floyd taking his last breath. You can see George Floyd down on the ground with a officer with his knee on his neck, and he's gulping for air. He's looking down on him several times. When he notices he stops moving, when he stops moving, he still looks down on him, even though he has this confrontation happening with these bystanders. He still looks down on him, still doesn't get off his neck. And he knows that he's being videotaped. That was blatant. That was a severe disregard for human life. That was intentional. They're trying to say right now, because of the officer not deciding to wake up that morning and just to go and murder George Floyd, the third-degree charge that they gave out some statement to say, today the police department did, by saying because he doesn't get hit with first-degree murder is because he didn't wake up that morning saying he was going to go and murder George Floyd. But he saw the man taking his last breath. He said, "I can't breathe," about 16 times. He was saying, "Let me stand up, let me stand up." And they still wouldn't. And what procedure out there in any police department that says if a person is resisting arrest? I know with theirs, they tried to say if a person is actively resisting arrest and poses an imminent threat with the resisting of arrest, they have the right to use that procedure, which is the knee on the body, the knee on the neck or whatever. But you have to let off at some point. You're supposed to be trying to save life. You can't be destroying it. You can't be trying to kill. And there was no imminent threat. Even if the paramedics was getting ready to show up and they was trying to keep him restrained until then, you can still let off of him. Take the chances of him running off. You won't be labeled a murderer after that. Take the chances of him running off with the handcuffs on. At least you won't be labeled a murderer. Did you not care about being labeled a murderer? Serving time in prison? Having other inmates that know about you because of what they heard on the news? Now you being sweated every time you go to the cafeteria. You got people looking at you, and you were once a police officer that was given honor and prestige because of who all you would bring in and all of this. Once you become a inmate and you got, you know, people looking at you sideways every other day, you're probably going to be saying to yourself, was it all worth it? Was it all worth it? So I wanted to get to some other things. This is another reason why black people are frustrated. This woman that was murdered in Louisville, Kentucky, Breonna Taylor, 26, shot and killed by police as they were entering her home. And the judge for that search warrant, he actually approved, and they actually have this as a search warrant, you know, no knock search warrant, where you don't have to identify yourself and you don't have to knock. You don't have to tell them what you're there for. There's a such warrant in Louisville, Kentucky. So I remember thinking to myself when I first heard about this, because I touched on in my last video, there are black people, not just black people, white people, a whole bunch of people who arm themselves in their homes because they're afraid of an intruder. Someone will come in, break in. They got families. They got kids, little ones. They're trying to protect them. For the purposes of protection, people arm themselves. They keep guns. And in the middle of the night, you know, where this has happened, when this happened, you know, this guy, what was his name? The boyfriend of Kenneth Walker, the boyfriend of Breonna Taylor. All he knows is that he's hearing sounds. And he goes for his weapon. Now, he survives, but he explains what happened later on. He says in his statement that the police didn't identify themselves or whatever. They just came in, he heard sounds, and he just goes for his weapon. He starts shooting. They start shooting back. He gets wounded, I believe, in the leg. The girlfriend, Breonna, get shot 8 times. And they tried to say they were dealing drugs, and this is why they executed on a search warrant. Here's my question. Even if that was true, they're hustling drugs out that house. Is that the type of police procedure that should be executed? A no-knock search warrant? You don't say nothing. You just, and they came over the door with a batter ram. I learned that today. I talked about that in my last video with the LA riots. They used a battering ram to burst open the door. They over here just like boom over drugs. An EMS worker, you know, who is sleeping. And they came with a battering ram. So it makes you wonder, is that the kind of procedure? Is that the kind of tactical types of procedures that should be done for those kind of circumstances? They said some drugs was being sold at a few houses down the street, and they noticed a male actually carrying a package of drugs from that house, according to surveillance that they did. But then later it was determined that there was no narcotics found or whatever. That's why black people are angry. This is why those cops need to be charged. At least then it will set a new tone. It will let cops know, you do this, you act like this is what's going to happen. You're going to be charged. You're going to be prosecuted. You're going to have your badge taken away. You're not going to get no law enforcement job anywhere else again. And that's what needs to happen with these 3 other cops that witnessed Officer Chauvin murder George Floyd right there in broad daylight. One thing I would like to touch on, and that is this police chief, the police chief of Minneapolis, who did an interview with CNN not too long ago. I believe his name is Chief. This is weird sounding, Madaria Arenado, something like that. But he recently did an interview with CNN, and he actually talked with the family of George Floyd, the brother and the attorney there, Crump. So they were talking to him and all of this, and he was asked a question by the CNN lady. And the CNN reporter that was interviewing this police chief, Hernando, she asked him, she said, and I'm quoting her, you don't see a difference between what Officer Chauvin did and some of whom kneeled down on George Floyd as well, and some of whom watched you know, quote unquote, him get murdered. You don't see a difference. This is basically what she's asking. You see that as the same act. And the chief responded by saying, silence and inaction, you're complicit. You're complicit. The reason why I wanted to touch on that a little bit is because about 2 months ago, I did a sermon talking about who will intercede, you know, involving this pandemic, because I learned a lot of people were, you know, getting out on social media and saying all kind of stuff about this pandemic, you know, COVID-19, who's responsible, the origin, China, is it man-made, is it from the devil, is it from God? You know, I was watching and listening to all kind of stuff. You know, churches were told to close and they didn't want to close, and, you know, they felt that their Second Amendment rights were being violated and all this. So I remember thinking, the Bible talks about immensely, if you see wrongdoing, that you are to intercede. That is the attitude that God wants us to take up. Now, you can call it what you want, but this is God's formula for how there is restoration, for how there is atonement, for how there is restitution for sins, for how there is forgiveness. You have to intercede for a nation to be restored, for a city to be restored, for a state to be restored according to the standards of God. You have to intercede. Now, if you don't believe me, just read Isaiah 59. The Bible mentions basically that God changes the definition of righteousness in Isaiah 59. Let me just briefly read it to you. Isaiah 59 verse 15. Yea, truth faileth, and he that departeth from evil maketh himself a prey. And the Lord saw it, and it displeased him that there was no judgment. And he saw that there was no man, and wondered that there was no intercessor. Therefore his arm brought salvation unto him, and his righteousness, it sustained him. God is basically saying, and I mentioned this in my my sermon that I did a couple months ago. He saw that there was no intercessor, and he uses a certain method at which, a certain standard at which he will restore a nation, a land, because of the desolation, because of the destroyed components that was brought on by sin, because of exile that was brought on by sin. At this point, Israel had, gone into captivity, and they were in exile, and they came from Judah and Jerusalem, mostly from Judah. So I remember thinking to myself, God is basically saying he will release the Israelites that are in Babylon. He will release the Israelites that are in Babylon. He will release them from captivity. But he needs to do it by his standard. Look how kind God is. Look at the core qualities of God when it comes to his standard of restoring. He says in Isaiah 59 verse 16, he saw that there was no intercessor. He saw that there was no man that would intercede, pray on behalf of those that are doing wrong, pray on behalf of those that are suffering, pray on behalf of them recovering, pray on behalf of them having everything restored unto them, their physical health, their mental health, their psychiatric health, their physical health. Pray on behalf of them, realize it disturbs you, realize that it bothers you. Because there was no man that he saw that can do this, he actually designated his own arm. He says, I'm going to just use my arm and designate this as a man, because I'm still going to go by this standard. I'm going to designate my arm as a man with righteousness. And what is righteousness? Interceding on behalf of those that are suffering, interceding on behalf of the evildoers. The Bible says in the 15th verse that they weren't departing from evil. And then you got this police chief who said, even the man that was standing there, even the two men that had their knees on George Floyd's back, though they weren't the ones cutting off the airflow, though they wasn't the ones that was preventing air going to the brain that needed him to survive, George Floyd, that would have kept him alive, though they weren't the ones that were, corresponding with him directly. It was Chafin. George Floyd was talking to Chafin when he said, let me get up. I'm sure he was referring to him. Let me get up. Let me stand up. Though those three officers felt they weren't being spoken to by George Floyd, as if they were the ones inflicting so much harm to where, he was letting them know, you're responsible for me dying if you don't let me get up. Though those three felt like he wasn't even talking to them, they're just as guilty. They're just as guilty. They need to be charged. They need to be charged. God said, I just want somebody to pray, basically, intercede. Let this affect you so much that you are praying on behalf of these people. You're wanting them to change their ways. The evildoers, the ones that are filled with iniquity, the ones whose heart is filled with doing evil continually, the ones who don't want to change. Why we have to talk about them so bad? Why we have to say so many disparaging things about them when we can pray that they will get it together? God said, I can restore based on that. Even if they don't get it together, I can restore based on that. God said while the Israelites were in captivity in Babylon, he still didn't find somebody who would intercede. But he went ahead and restored anyway. Now there is his love, one of his core qualities. He didn't need a human being in the book of Isaiah. He said, I'm going to go ahead and use my arm and designate that as righteousness unto salvation. Salvation meaning what? You're going to actually be rescued. I'm going to bring you out of Babylon. You're going to go back to Judah and Jerusalem. But he had to be saying to himself at one point, I didn't find anybody who cared about one another, who cared about everyone else's plight, who lamented over the things that they were going through. Others, forgetting about themselves, forget what I'm going through, forget my health. I hate to see these children suffering. Can't go to school, walking around idly, getting themselves in trouble because they're not in school. Now it's the summer, and it's like, well, this is typical, whatever they're doing. But the idea that I don't even care about what the kids are going through, I'm more concerned about my rights. I'm more concerned about, the fact that I can't go to church. I'm more concerned about the fact that I can't go to a grocery store. I can't open up my business. And I'm willing to be shot over that. I was reading about a race riot that happened in Avondale, Ohio, back in 1967. And this is an idea of destruction and chaos being reversed that was directed toward the enemy. Listen to this. I'm over here doing research and reading, and I'm learning about a race riot that happened in Avondale, Ohio. And a guy named James Smith that owned a store. He owned a store that had the potential of being looted. So he's out there with a shotgun, whatever, a weapon, and he's noticing that looters are coming through. And his wife is there too. So this is why it could be dangerous to protest, and this is why it could be dangerous to try to guard your store, because you're so worried about it and you got your life savings wrapped in it. This is why you should just let the rioters take it and not get killed. This is devastating, what I'm about to share. This man, James Smith, he's out there with his shotgun, and he's realizing he's going to defend his store if he has to, among anybody, any looters. So they get to the store, and they struggling, they fighting or whatever. The wife is there. Fire goes off from James Smith's shotgun, whatever, and he winds up accidentally killing his wife. Accidentally killed his wife. It didn't even have to be like this. It didn't even have to be like this. To accidentally kill your wife while you're trying to guard your store. Protests due to you protesting that you're going to guard your store. Would George Floyd want people to die behind guarding their store? You got to think about what he would want. I do know that if we cry out to God as often enough and let him know our pain and our misery and our frustration, he will save us. He will save us. Let me read this in Ezekiel 9. Ezekiel 9, and this is the first through the fourth verse. Then I heard, New International Version, then I heard him call out in a loud voice, bring the guards of the city each, bring the guards of the city here, each with a weapon in his hand. And I saw 6 men coming from the direction of the upper gate, which faces north, each with a deadly weapon in his hand. With them was a man clothed in linen who had a writing kit at his side. They came in and stood beside the bronze altar. Now the glory of God of Israel went up from above the cherubim where it had been and moved it to the threshold of the temple. Then the Lord called to the man clothed in linen who had a writing kit at his side and said to him, go throughout the city of Jerusalem and put a mark on the foreheads of those who grieve and lament over the detestable things that are done in it. God said to Ezekiel, I want you to observe this. I want you to observe this. These men are going to kill and murder all of the people in the city because of the detestable things that are done in it. And the only ones that are saved are going to be the ones that this man I've designated that has to go around the whole city, putting a mark on people's head. And the mark is supposed to symbolize them lamenting and grieving over the detestable things done in this city, over the sin that is done in this city. When we hear about violent crimes, when we hear about molestation of children, when we hear about sexual abusers, on teens, and when we hear about murders, we need to be lamenting and grieving. We need to be saying in our heart, this is wrong. When there's not a protest, when there's not an upheaval, of violence going on all over our nation. When we hear about these cases, it needs to devastate us so that we cry to God and we pray and we say, God, we want these things to change. What's in the police department, what's in City Hall, what's in the county, what's happening all over our city. The things that I'm witnessing, reading about, I just want to intercede on behalf of those people who are in office to change things and put it in their heart that the things they read about are is compelling them to want to change things. Because this is getting out of hand. It's getting out of hand. God, help us. Help us and the ones that are in office who are elected officials to invoke change so that we can stop reading about these devastating stories. The protesters getting ran over by motorists. The college students being tasered by police, the frustration of police and them just going out there and just treating people however they want now. All of these things. What they're saying about Trump. I mean, to me, it's like, what do you expect? The man is ungodly. The man can hold a Bible all he wants to. The man can get up in front of a church, St. John in D.C., and try to stand there for a photo op, whatever, to try to prove to people that he wasn't showing a sign of weakness by being hampered down in the basement of the White House when all these protesters was down there in Lafayette Park, trying to tear up the barricades, the fences and all of that, and Secret Service is having to defend it. He tried to come out, that next day, whatever, and, had ordered the National Guardmen, the military, to get out there and just start moving protesters and bum rushing through them. It was an ambush in a way. There was, media posted behind their vans and everything, trying to get footage and all of that, and police are just hitting them in the stomach with their shields and, hitting them with their batons and all of this. And this is all for Trump to exit the White House later and go into a photo op in front of St. John Church that had been vandalized, in the basement set on fire just a day prior. The windows are boarded up and everything, and all you can see is him holding this Bible. And it's like, come on, read it, open it. What you holding it for? But that man is so incompetent, and I feel it's just a waste of energy to say so much about him. It's like it's going to get lost, in translation, with the real focus being, the honor of George Floyd. You know, there's a lot of protesters out here that want things to go off topic. And a lot of law enforcement can't distinguish between the genuine protesters, the one that are trying to protest peacefully, and the anarchists, the opportunists, the arsonists. All they know is they all are mixed together. And when the police see that all of these different crowds are mixed together, even when the peaceful protesters try to detain and put a citizen's arrest on these violent protesters, all the police see is chaos. So they're just going to shoot you with rubber bullets, throw tear gas. They're going to think that, you know, you hit somebody or whatever. All the police know is they see chaos. That's why it's not safe to be out there. It's already happening. It happened in Seattle. There was a woman out there from ABC News trying to do a live shot, and they went up to one guy that was a peaceful protester, and some girl with a ski mask on came with a bullhorn and saying, this guy's working with the government. He's working with the government. He's working with the government. Don't listen to him. We are here to let the people know this peaceful protester is working with the government. And then she tried to hijack the live shot interview. She just starts getting in the shot, and then the producer dude, you know, is telling her to back away and all of this. It's crazy. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. Those 3 officers that were involved in George Floyd's murder need to be charged. They need to be given an awakening. You can't do this to black people. The vigor of the anger, to me, is coming from a genuine place with a lot of black protesters, which is, it's only because of the technology increasing. It's only because of the digital age that we're in on why we're being believed. There has been multiple complaints, and look at how you can have an officer that's getting complained about for a long period of time, Officer Shaven, the one that murdered George Floyd, and still don't get relieved from duty. He get relieved from duty when it's on video of him murdering somebody. You don't get relieved from duty when you're on the first complaint, second complaint, third complaint, fourth complaint, fifth complaint, sixth complaint, seventh complaint, eighth complaint, ninth complaint, 10th complaint, 11th complaint, 12th complaint, 13th complaint. No, when is he relieved from duty? When it's on video that he murdered somebody. How many complaints do you need and not have video? How many complaints do you need? Police departments all over America. How many complaints do you need and not have video? I'm smart enough to realize why that man was relieved from his duty within a couple days. I'm smart enough to realize why that man is in custody, why that man has a charge of third-degree murder. It's on video. Just like all these other officers that were charged, it was on video. And a lot of times, a lot of officers that were charged and it wasn't on video, it's because of multiple witnesses. They got too many corroborating accounts, eyewitness accounts. We got to change this. We got to change this. We really need to come together as a nation and change this. Pray to God. Ask God to give justice. Your will be done. Your will take over. Your will establish a new way of doing things. Your will changes the law. Somebody sought you. All these officers that are kneeling in prayer with peaceful protesters, that's beautiful. But go home. Do like Jesus said. Go in your closet. Pray to God in secret. And what he sees in secret, he will reward openly. Thank you for tuning in. Continue to pray for this nation. Continue to ask God that he sends salvation, that he sends rest unto our souls, that COVID-19 passes, that there's no more deaths from that. People are recovering, businesses are reopening, schools are reopening, and everybody comes together in love. In love.